Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates, with your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have a special guest. Martha Earl Cray is with us. Hi, Martha. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
So Martha, she has a story that we're going to get to. She's pushing for some legislation in New Jersey. We'll get to that later, but let's start at the very beginning, Martha. Let's talk about your son, Billy. When you were pregnant with him, were there any kind of red flags when you went to the doctor? Did they say that there could possibly be something wrong, or was everything okay?
No, actually, he was a fairly large baby. In fact, they were questioning whether or not I was going to have twins or not. And there was only one heartbeat in there. Mm-hmm. So it was a healthy pregnancy.
Okay, good. And then how about the birth? Were there any kind of complications?
The birth was done natural birth, and he was 10 pounds, 11 ounces.
Wow.
It was a tough delivery, but he had a great APGAR score of 10. So, you know, he got the star on his bassinet in the hospital that he was born in.
Good, good. And then how about his development? Was he on time with his crawling and walking and all that?
Basically, it was more of his speech and his unattentiveness. In the beginning, when he was approaching maybe 18 months, 19 months too, he wasn't saying mama or dada or pointing or any of that. So I spoke with a pediatrician, and he suggested I get his hearing check. So I went there to do that, and his hearing was fine. I failed to mention something when you mentioned, can you go back if you don't mind?
Sure.
And about his infancy. When Billy was, and mind you, he had a 10 APGAR score. When he was not even a month old, he was administered the pertussis shot. And he was immediately admitted into the hospital with high running fevers. And the doctors told me he had an allergic reaction to the pertussis shot. And when he came home from that, of course, they ruled everything else, ruled out sepsis, and they were having a hard time accepting this. And Billy had 104 temperature all week. And after being in the hospital 2 weeks, he came home an entirely different baby, entirely. And I used to have to wake him up to feed him. He was very distant. I just wanted to make that point quite clear. That's when our nightmare started. Then around when the ages of 2.5, I went and had him evaluated by the child study scene of my school district. And he decorated the office. In fact, things were flying. The plants were flying in the room. And then they said at that point that he cannot attend the preschool handicap class in our district. And then at that time, they gave no other thoughts on ideas or options of his schooling. So he sat home for a while, and I tried to get them to have me look at some like daytime programs, because he couldn't, basically there was nothing in public schools that would offer him any services. So my school district was sitting on it, and I constantly called there. I went down there, and then I believe I had enough, and I said, this is the start of advocating for my son. I reached out to the Union County Board of Ed and had the supervisor there contact the school district to where I live. And next day, the director of pupil services was at my door, and we started the seeking out programs that would offer services to my son. He was seen by a neurologist and been tested. And it was actually the Rutgers program that diagnosed my son. At that time, it was called communication handicap.
How old would Billy be now?
Well, to me, he's always going to be 33, but I would say he would be 37.
37. That's why I'm just trying to figure out how long ago this was.
Oh, there's a lot to tell. It was a long
But I didn't know
road.
Rutgers had a program back then.
Well, no, it wasn't a program where, well, actually, he did attend the Douglas Developmental School on Cook campus at Rutgers, but they had he was examined by a team of psychiatrists and neurologists there, and it was Rutgers who classified him as communications handicapped and then pervasively developmentally disabled across the board.
Right.
And because my husband and I were watching him through a mirror, and he was not joining in with the other patients in the room. And there was the sameness of him taking the sand and their table there, the same thing over and over and over again. And then they brought us into the room and they told us the inevitable. And
how old was he then? Was he 2, 3?
He was 2.5 going on 3. And they basically said that means he's going to have a struggle in life of learning and developing. And at that time, he was nonverbal.
That's what I was just going to say. Could he speak?
He was nonverbal.
He didn't say no words at all.
No words at all.
Okay.
No, but the person that I am and the mother that I am, I took him all over New Jersey to get him speech therapy. And I was adamant about that. And because they were telling me he was never going to speak. And I brought him to Kane College at that time, had basically a program that would evaluate him further and give him speech, but none of the speech and language was working at that point. Nothing came of that.
So you got him into a school? You mentioned a school though that he went to.
Well, yeah, you know what? They first put him in a program in Scotch Plains, which offers a huge program for the nonverbal and for the
special needs kids.
Special needs with what
Right.
Billy had.
Right.
And he started his outbursts in there, and they said it was unsafe for him. And he was always a large young man. So they said to me that, they're not going to be able to keep him in the program. And then our next step was he got an in at the Forum School in Wyckoff, New Jersey, where they have aggressive speech and language therapy, occupational therapy. They have a pool within in their program. And he was doing very well at first. And then he started knocking bookshelves over. And then there was non-ambulatory students, and they were at risk by my son's temper tantrums. So at that time, Dr. Crape was the director of that school. And he was suggesting programs that would benefit my son, Eden Institute and Princeton Child Developmental Center. But it was very, very hard to get in there. And it turned out that he got an in at the Douglas Developmental Center at Rutgers on Cook campus. And it's still there. They've expanded. The Douglas Developmental School started out in a trailer. And by the time Billy got in there, they already had their buildings set up, the school, which had many speech pathologists, occupational therapists. They taught in one room, there was a bed that taught him how to do his, make his bed, do laundry. So he handled that pretty well. He was pretty much independent in that regards, in that program. But when push came to shove, he again was throwing heavy objects and actually hurting teachers. And we were doing good for a while. There was undergraduates from Rutgers who came in and were one-on-ones with the person served. But as they learned behaviors from others, he did hair pulls. And when you get a hair pull from Billy, it's very difficult. So
now, what was he violent at home? Was he
Yes.
pulling? He was breaking things and pulling your hair and all that?
Yes, I had hair, bald spots here, in many places, you know, but I managed to get him under control. And a lot of times my husband was nearby and my older son. Actually, he aggressed on my older son. And it got to a point.
Was your older son, is he big like Billy too, or?
My other son's real tall. Yeah, he's not big in nature like Billy, but he's athletically built.
So what was setting him off? Was it, I know when you can't speak, they get very frustrated because you don't understand what they want, right? And
Absolutely.
he's trying to request something you don't understand. Is that what's setting him off? Or?
He would, how he would want to get something, he would stamp his feet and scream, but we didn't know what he was screaming about. We weren't understanding.
Right.
But in one of the programs he was in, they've developed a language board. You know, it was all, it was, you know, a picture of a cup, picture of the bathroom, picture of a cookie, picture of being tired, sad. Right. And we were able to start that off.
Right.
But when he was being transported to these daytime programs funded by the school district, he injured people on the bus. Because, mind you, all the students on the bus, they had behaviors too. So they kind of learned from one another. And my son pulled the hair of a bus driver. He had a ponytail, and my son, who had a harness on his seat,
yeah,
he managed to pull the seat out that were screwed in and get to the bus driver.
He pulled the whole seat out?
Yes, he did. And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm laughing now, but it wasn't funny.
No, it wasn't funny then, no.
He injured the bus driver. And then
while he was
I
driving?
received a call from the department of, and I received a letter too, from the Department of Transportation in Trenton. And they said, unfortunately, they will not be able to transport Billy to any programs in New Jersey. And we had people come in to be like a staff, that I would hire and come in to be his.
You hired somebody to come into the house?
Yeah, I hired somebody to come into the house to help us deal with him.
Right.
And he was very good.
Okay. But if they said they weren't going to transport him anymore, how did he get to school, or did he stop going? What did you do?
Well, that's when
then you stopped taking him to school?
That's when the Division of Developmentally Disabled program in my district in Union County paid a visit to my house, and we had a meeting. Actually, I think the first meeting was at the Douglas School, and their meeting, along with my husband and myself and the school district and the staff and the leadership team at the Douglas Developmental School in New Brunswick. They basically said to us, we cannot school him anymore from home.
Wait, what do you mean they can't school him from home? What do you mean? They were coming to the house?
They couldn't bus him.
Oh, they couldn't bus
be
him
in any
anymore.
daytime program because he got expelled from all of them because they didn't know how to manage them.
Right.
Mind you, the Douglas Developmental School is known for handling the most challenged behaviors.
Right.
And
so
at that
now
time he was 8 years old and he was very strong.
So wait, so hold on. So the Douglas School is telling you now that they're not going to take him anymore either? Is that what you're saying?
No, they cannot, because the teachers have gotten hurt.
Oh.
And so we had no other choice in the matter.
So now you decided now you're going to keep him home, and you hired someone to work with him at home.
Well, he was a respite worker, if you will. Okay. And he was paid by stipend money from the Division of Developmental Disabilities. That was back then. I don't know if there's any more funding for that, unfortunately. But what happened was the Division of Developmental Disabilities was sending us to residential programs. And my husband really, both of us had a really hard time, but this is my husband's son. And, you know, it was both of us were devastated. There was a lot of emotion in there. The Division of Developmentally Disabled caseworker basically said, it's time that you have to place your son residentially where he's in structure all year round. And I said, yes, but he's only 10 or 9 going on 10. And he said, but he's not safe at home for you, your older son, and your husband, or anybody within the community that you bring him out into.
Okay.
But we needed to find a transitional plan because he couldn't be at home,
right,
and he couldn't be anywhere else. And what happened was the person who came from this facility, the director, he was like the director psychologist intake, said it suggested that he be placed in a biobehavioral hospital, get his medication stable before he go into
that makes
facility.
sense.
So our district, our school district, and help of many friends, we got him into the Philadelphia Seashore House. It's a hospital in Philadelphia, and they had a very good program. It's no longer, they lost their funding years after. But my son went in, my husband and I took him there, and we stayed at a hospital, we stayed at a hotel nearby, and we were part of their intake. And they would give him, they would check out how much he could tolerate before he gets angry. So they were running tests like having him color and then spilling the crayons off of the table. And of course he'd have a meltdown, and the woman in the intake would chart what's going on.
Sure.
And he got accepted into the program. I had to, it was a really hard road getting him in there. And so this was a 4-month stay in a hospital. And at that time, it was not covered under insurance until my husband, who worked for a pharmaceutical company, because he was such a good employee there, under the insurance he had in his work, his benefits, they flew my husband's file to the corporate office and read the file and whatnot, and funded 4 months. And basically at that time, it was $1,300 a day. So getting back to the transition, we had the advantage, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Bridget Taylor. Many may know her. She runs I don't know if she still runs it now, but she runs at the Alpine Learning Center. She is at best to evaluate my son with his behavior. She worked with him every day, and Bridget worked with Stu and I. And by the time he left the Philadelphia Seashore House, you could say no to Billy, you know. And at this time, his language was coming out. There's a whole lot of moving parts here. He started speaking finally at 5 years of age. And what happened was, once his language came out, it opened Pandora's box in his aggressions, because he had a hard time not articulating. He had a hard time recalling, or basically he couldn't express himself. He was not able to expressively speak and say how he feels or whatnot. But after a while, as he got older, he speaks very well and is very, very good at telling people what happened to him, what time it happened, because he was fascinated with watches, and what room he was in, regarding his abuse, which we'll speak about down the road here. He was able to name the person and what happened to him. So in any event, he was transported from the Philadelphia Seashore House in the facility that I mentioned before, where they came out to see him at Douglas. It was a clinical director. That's the word I was searching for. And he's part of the intake. Then they accepted him in. But unfortunately, because Bridget was into extinction, which works very well with Billy. An extinction where you're ignoring the negative behavior, and that caused him to really get worked up. And he was brought to a quiet corner of the room where he's away from everything, and he let him have his tantrum until nobody was, watching him, being his audience. Okay, so he was admitted into this facility for the developmentally disabled. And in this program, half of it was at that time was for the emotionally disturbed and the developmentally disabled. Billy was neurologically impaired.
What was this? A group home, a hospital? What kind of setting was this?
It was a residential group home facility, which is incorporated a school where the students go to school. Mm-hmm. And then there's a group home that is attached to, not to the building, but Billy was placed in a group home with other persons served.
How many people in the home? Was this just like 4 people, or it's like an apartment?
5, but if there was a waiver, they would allow 6. So Billy was in there. It was a beautiful home. Everything seemed fine, mm-hmm. but I can't talk about anything else negative about this program. He was there 5 years, and then he was taken out of that program into another program called the Allegro program, located in Rockaway.
Right. Allegro is a school for special needs.
Allegro was a school, again, mm-hmm. with group homes and a day work program available as well.
Okay. And so, all right. So he was in the original one for 5 years. So that was what, from when he was 10 to 15? And then he went to Allegro when he was like 15?
Well, actually, he was in the first program until, goodness gracious, all I know is when he went into Allegro, he was 16. So he was there quite a bit in mm-hmm. the first program I told you about.
Okay. And you were not mentioning any names. You're not saying what the name of the program was, but there were issues back then, no?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that Billy, you believe, was being abused. I know you've had pictures of him with bruises on him. So that was happening in this original facility, which we're not naming? Or you're not allowed to talk about it?
Yes, I'm not really allowed to talk about it.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. But it's leading up to the legislation that we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Billy was abused in many, many group homes.
Okay. And I didn't realize that he could speak now, and he can name names and times and tell you what was happening.
Yes.
Okay. And this was going on since the time he was 10 years old? Right, when he first
started when he was 12 years old.
12. Okay. And he was telling you?
Yes, every detail.
Okay. So then my question is, why did he stay? Couldn't you get him out? Could you not prove what was happening?
Yes. By going to my caseworker at
DDD?
DDD caseworker at the Division of Developmental Disabilities.
Mm-hmm. You went to them.
He then went to another facility mm-hmm. attached with a group home and school, at this mm-hmm. time a work program.
Did the person that did the abusing, did they get in trouble? Did they get fired or anything? Was anything done to them?
I can't talk about that.
You're right. Okay, you're right.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just know that these are questions people are going to be thinking, because I'm thinking, okay, all right. So you're not, all right. So let's move on. So how many different facilities was he in? Living facilities? 6?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
and he was abused in every single one of them.
Okay. And he was explaining to you what they were doing.
Oh, yes. He endured at all of the facilities, mm-hmm. a total of 3 sexual assaults, 2 by clients, one when he was 12, mm-hmm. and one when he was, I'm going to say basically he basically was sexually assaulted by a female staff in Bancroft Neurohealth mm-hmm. in Cherry Hill. And he told me very explicitly what happened to him. Mm-hmm. And the woman who did this to my son, I stayed on the detective with this because she also abused another housemate, but mm-hmm. she was accused of kicking him. Mm-hmm. And couldn't get the police department to take the report because I wanted to file a report. Finally, they did. And I worked with a detective in Cherry Hill and finally got her into take a lie detector test. Finally, because I was on the phone every day, every morning with the detective, and they finally brought her in. And she failed the lie detector test 3 times and failed it terribly. And then the detective said she almost gave up what she did, but I did my own detective work, and the management realized that I was doing this, and they highly recommended that, because he was going to be going into their adult program at Bancroft, that I don't press charges on her because there's a bed waiting in the adult services at Bancroft Neurohealth. And then Billy kept on having behaviors because he was abused. I mean, there was a lot of things that went on at Bancroft. He had a one-on-one, and he eloped, and it took them, the staff, a half an hour to find him. And they found him nearby water. And the police had him in handcuffs. And they couldn't figure out who's supposed to be watching him.
Right.
So finally, the Bancroft staff ran up and caught up with him. And then while he was running, it was at a dance he ran away from. And he ran next door while the staff didn't realize he was missing, pulled the school alarm on the Haddonfield High School.
Oh.
And what happened was there was a wrestling match going on. And this was during their finals. And it was middle of January. He had no coat on. And he ran into the school, went into the band room, cleared out their band room, and ran in the middle of a match. And they cleared out. Finally, the police caught up with him at this point, I believe, outside, because all the wrestlers were standing outside in their singlets. And there's Billy with handcuffs on. And then finally, the Bancroft staff caught up with him. Then the staff said, well, we got him. We'll take him back to the group home. But what happened was, in doing so, there was a teacher that attended that wrestling match. She went out to her car to get some things, books or something or other. And this was at night. And Billy went up and aggressed on her and grabbed her from the behind. And she didn't know Billy from Adam. So she took it, because he did not appear disabled. She filed the report that she believed he sexually assaulted her, not sexually, but from the front.
Right.
And this went to court, and Bancroft didn't back me up. So I had to hire a lawyer. I had to hire a lawyer for me because I was his legal parent and guardian. And I had to hire one for Billy. And when we went to court and the judge was reading this, and he basically said, I can't believe what I'm reading. This child needs to be watched 24/7, supervised 24 hours a day. And he cannot be responsible for this. The judge said Bancroft dropped the ball on this. He dropped the charges. And that's when, at this point, there was no other places to place my son anywhere else, because when this population has challenging behaviors, these facilities really don't want him in their program. That's the bottom line.
Right.
Months after that, he basically was showing more behaviors in the group home. And at one point, there was a staff that finally, she closed the door on him and just closed the door and said basically to the other staff, he's a bleeping lunatic. And there was broken glass all around because he was throwing lamps. They didn't even clean up after that. And there was, when I went in to see this 2 days later, there was exposed wires and from the lamp that he threw. What they did at that point is they called 911 because it was a danger to himself or others.
Right.
So he would go into crisis. Billy was in crisis, in which they're bused from an ambulance to a hospital in their mental health, an emergency room, to be examined by a psychiatrist. And usually when Billy gets back to, and it's most cases to many of the families that I help, once they get back into their emergency room, they're safe. They feel safe, and they don't display any challenging behaviors during the evaluation by the psychiatrist. And then they send them back home, like to the group home, in the middle of chaos, and then they're sent back out again. You know, they're constantly sent into crisis. So Bancroft threw my son out, and the hospital needed a bed. So that was the worst time of our life. With the situation, because I even got my legislature from District 21, the late Assemblyman Dr. Eric Munoz got involved, and DDD was not helping me in the least. And finally, because of the help of a legislature, Assemblyman Munoz, he was then removed from the hospital because the hospital definitely needed beds. And he was thrown into Woodbine Developmental Center, an institution. And while he was in Woodbine Developmental Center, he endured his third sexual assault by another client. And the problem there was, because Billy told me many times he had to wake up staff from sleeping so he could get his meds. Make no mistake, but based on my experience working and seeing the insides of these group homes, they sleep. They sleep. Some of them have been found to be sleeping on top of the dining room table because they didn't want to be seen on the couch.
Right.
And this isn't about
I know this because when I put Robbie in a group home, I slept on the couch for the first 2 weeks just to be there and keep an eye on everything, because I didn't want.
Did they allow you to stay in the group home to sleep on the couch?
They did. Yep. And because I
wanted. They usually don't allow that.
I know. Well, they let me because I was trying to help them learn how to deal with Robbie, how to understand him, because he was nonverbal. I didn't want him to hurt them, you know.
Oh, I don't blame you.
And so, but I woke up a couple times and saw the overnight staff sitting in the kitchen with their head on the table sleeping. They weren't doing what they were supposed to.
There you go. There you. And you know what? When these staff, and you've heard of the Boggs Learning Center, when Eileen Rivera, she's my partner in advocating, sister in advocating, and Tom Caminos met with the management team at the Boggs Learning Center. They said to me, basically, when they come in, they sit down and they play with their phones, and they put their heads on the desk, and they fall asleep. And this is an ongoing problem. And nobody.
If you work a night shift, you should be putting your body on that body clock of working the night shift, like a nurse in the hospital, you know. But I think this is a second job for people. They think it's easy, and they I'll get paid to work all night and just sleep. It's not. No. So listen, my issue with the group homes is that the staff there is not trained. They don't know how to work with people with autism. They have no training at all. They're just babysitters, basically. And they don't know how to handle the behaviors or anything. And I feel like the group homes need a complete revamp, and they need to change the way they do things, because the teachers in his school are great. They know what they're doing. They know how to handle people with autism. And it's that same staff is the type of people that should be working in group homes, people that absolutely know what they're doing, but it doesn't pay enough. It's a minimum wage job.
Well, the thing is, I've had very heartfelt staff that were underpaid, that when my son was in the hospital for pneumonia, worked 2 nights, just not work on her own time, slept overnight with Billy, because I lived an hour and a half away.
Right.
And Billy worked very good with the staff. Right. And the problem that I've noticed, and we know what goes on, I mean, Eileen, Tom, and I lived it in these group homes, when the heartfelt staff are doing their job, when they're, and then when they report abuse and they're doing all the work, making good meals for them and everything, and having the person served in the house do their chores. What I mean by chores, you know, doing the dishes, laundry, teaching them how to live independently. The staff that think it's a babysitting job get on the cases of the heartfelt staff that are doing this. And many
it makes
of
them
the
look bad.
staff come and tell me this. And they're basically, they end up leaving because, you know, especially when they, in Billy's situation, when he was at Devereaux, you know, he finally wound up in Devereaux after he was pulled out of Woodbine Developmental Center. He was then put into Devereaux of New Jersey, and that's where he died, at Summers Point. But every time he came to me with an allegation and showed me his injuries, they would beat him. They would throw him against the wall where there would be an outline of his body.
Wow.
And there was a staff member, her name is Jessica Gustafson. If you ever want to contact her to interview, that would be great. But she testified before the Assembly Human Services Committee, and she had the committee in tears because she was there and witnessed it and reported it. And there was another, the group home manager initially would do the same.
Would do the same
Based
what?
on what
report?
I was told, they were reprimanded by the upper management about reporting abuse. And they were warned about Billy before the new hirees came in. And they said that Billy, he lies. They used this term, he's a liar and he's a lunatic. So
wait, so you're saying the staff was told not to report abuse?
Yes, they would beat Billy up every time Billy came to me. And Jessica Gustafson, I have her testimony, and I'll email that to you. When she heard the crash in where they pushed Billy against the wall in the bathroom, you could see the outline. And she went in there, and they said, "You cannot do that." And they said, "Hush, the upper management is upstairs," and they put a poster over the big hole in the wall. Okay. And
wait, so this was two people? Hold on. So you're saying two people pushed him?
Well, there's usually more than one person because he's a big guy. Usually in most cases, there's two. Okay. And when they restrain him, it's usually 3-on-1.
So you're saying two people pushed him into the wall. Jessica ran in and said, "You can't do that."
Yeah, you cannot do that.
And they told her to be quiet.
So, and then they shushed her. And they said the upper management is upstairs, be quiet.
Okay.
And
and
the Division of Developmental Disabilities did not help or support any time there was, they did not hold anybody accountable in any of these. In fact, any investigations that were done by the Internal Investigation Unit. Before I get to my story, I'm holding this bruise up. This was done as a result of Billy reporting abuse to me. And then when I came to report it to DDD, with my notes, DDD took this picture, the Division of Developmental Disabilities took this picture and sent it back. This is the other bruise. And I'm sorry, you have to see this. This is another one. And
oh my gosh.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to put that down.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
anytime he told you what they were doing, they would
no,
he
was afraid to tell me about pushing him through the wall because he was absolutely terrified that in fact, eventually he did not want me to file a report with anybody. Mommy,
because
please
don't. I know because you're making it worse because they're gonna retaliate. Yeah.
And that's what goes on.
Okay, that's it for part 1. Be sure to tune in for part 2. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. If you're interested in buying our book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, the link will be in our episode description as well as my Instagram and Facebook pages. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like more content, please be sure to hit that like button, follow us, and don't forget to leave us a great review. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of today's episode. Be sure to join us again next time to hear the second half of the interview on Spectrum Perspectives.